Hi there, it's me, Jordan Van Haslo. Welcome to Jordan Van Haslo and Friends live on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas. Let's get on with the show. Welcome to another episode of Showtime with Jordan Van Haslo and Friends right here on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas. I'm so glad you're all here joining. Today we have a brand new friend. Well, I guess she's a new friend to me, but she's not a new friend to Jose, who they actually went to school. Our producer, Jose, for those of you new, they actually went to school together. She is a visual artist whose work has been described as combining the training of her work as an animator as well as a painter and her love of the old masters techniques. And I was looking at her website just in preparation of getting to meet her, and she seems pretty prolific. Well, I want to ask her about that. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome new friend Gigi Chen. Hi, Gigi.
Oh, hi, Jordan. So happy to be here. I love radio, so this is a dream.
Yay! Well, that makes me very, very happy. Well, welcome. What I was about to say, and then I realized, wait, why am I talking about you like you're not here on the broadcast? I was just kind of like, looking and learning about you. You are like pretty prolific and like you show all the time. Like I was like going just through your CV and all of the exhibitions you do. Like I was just counting the exhibitions you did in 2023 and the exhibitions you did, well, just 2023. There are so many of them. Like that really rocks. You stay busy.
I stay very busy. It's very important. Quick minds. I always have to stay busy. Very productive. I think that has,
Yeah,
it's just for me, sometimes we have, getting older, always, right?
uh,
And there's just,
always.
oh. It's like, being productive is a big part of my life, mostly just because it's keeps us all sane, doesn't it? I mean, I don't know how many interviews you record a week, but in order for me to feel like I feel like my wheels always have to be greased, right?
Right. No,
The creative march always has to be going.
I agree with that because what I know for myself, like if I don't have anything to do, it's so easy to then literally do nothing. And then you like look up and it's like, oh my goodness, I've literally been lying in bed watching Law and Order for like 5 days straight and like
Oh,
not
but that's
uh,
fun. I
oh, it's fun.
love getting to do that. If I have a chance, oh my goodness. Look, yo, if
well,
I get a chance
in,
to just do that.
but I mean, in spits and spurts, it's nice, right? Especially like
Yeah.
as a creative, you sometimes just need to just like step back and step away from what you're creating just to get more inspiration. And you need to kind of just shut down. But I was just saying, in terms of you needing to be busy, I find that if I'm not busy, like that's all I'll do. And then I'll be like, oh my God, I didn't accomplish anything. So I understand the need to always have the hamster wheel spinning, for lack of a better metaphor.
Yeah, I mean the hamster wheel is always going. I just took a little bit of a break because I just finished two full shows, and I did take like a week and a half off. My friend needed me to take care of her dog, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna stay on the Upper East Side with this dog for a week and a half. I was like, yes. Taking care of an animal, waking up at dawn to walk this little dog and be like, yes, I'm on your time. You have to go to the bathroom every three hours. That's perfect. I like to be outside too.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I'm so excited just to learn more about you because I came up as a musician and in television. So I really don't know much about the art world. The closest I ever came to working in the art world was that I worked for an antiques gallery that sold art. And so I've always been really fascinated with the career and the career trajectory of the visual arts because you create and then you sell, you create and then you sell. And I think that that's so fascinating. How at what point did you decide to become a gallery artist? Because I know in school, I think in school you studied animation, correct?
Right. I went to so Jose and I actually both went to LaGuardia Music and Art for high school, which is the fame school for all of
Hmm.
those who've seen that old movie from the 80s. Is that, you know, I always wanted to make art. I always picked up art. You know, I watched a lot of Bob Ross when I was a kid. And oh my goodness,
He's
I
another
watched
one I could just lie in bed and just watch all day.
oh, he's amazing. You know, and I don't know if you've watched any of it recently, but I started watching some of his older, you know, it's like from the very beginning. I watched the first few episodes and I was like, wow, as an adult, this is a whole other experience, right? When you're a kid, you're like, whoa, it's magic because he does it so
Uh-huh.
quickly. And he was also very prolific. And he made, you know, for each of those shows, he made like 3 copies of the paintings. It was
Oh
crazy.
wow.
Yeah. I mean, it was
Yeah.
crazy. And so I, as a kid, I watched that and I thought art is magic, and that was immediately what I wanted to do. My mother got me watercolor sets, and I just banged out paintings every single day as a kid. I was obsessed with it. I was
Do
really
you
obsessed with it.
do you or maybe it changes because when you were a kid, but like when you were a kid, were you like just like you say banging out paintings? Like are you still that way? Were you like just bang out paintings? You have an idea and you're able to just like execute it, or do you kind of sit with it for a while and like maybe do a little and then put it away, maybe work on something else and then go back to it?
Gosh, it's so different now. You know, when you're doing it full time, it's not like, you know, it's funny. It's when I first started, no one, I mean, you kind of had this like I started showing in galleries when I was in my early 20s after college. So, you know, I have a degree in animation along with Jose in traditional animation. But when I left school in 2004, I didn't really feel like that's what I wanted to do with my life. You know, everything was about to go digital. Like literally, it was like we were right on the cusp of everything going digital. And I thought,
Everything you learned changed, right? And everything you
yeah,
expected to do. I've had this conversation with Jose. I've had this conversation with my musician friends because, like, we're all around the same age, and it's like, oh, all of a sudden, the music's going digital. All of a sudden, it's like in the way that you go about everything you expected and everything that you were taught over however long it had been had like was like throw that out the window. It's
right.
all new now.
Yeah. And it's like, I could not imagine myself sitting in front of a computer doing other people's work digitally. And, you know, basically if you got a job at any of these studios, they would give you an assignment and you would have to fulfill things in the computer, which was fine. I knew how to use the computer. But I thought, you know, I'm so good at using my hands. I'm so good at creating stuff. And also, I didn't want to always be telling other people's stories. And I didn't really want to
Mm-hmm.
be, I just could not imagine myself at a full time job, sitting in front of a computer, creating these productions, which are great. And I love that my friends a lot of them are still in the business, but it wasn't really for me.
It's not
And, you
very
know,
romantic, right? It's not very
no,
romantic. Like it's like versus sitting with a canvas. Did you what made you want to major in animation? Like when you were a kid, were you like into cartoons and thought, "Oh, that's the career I want?" Or how did you even get to animation in college?
well, when I was a kid, I watched a lot of Disney cartoons. I wanted to be Ariel. Oh my goodness. I mean, we grew up in the 90s, you know, the golden age of Disney animation with Beauty and the Beast, and the Little
Mm,
Mermaid was the reason why I started drawing. It was a big
well,
thing. Oh my
that
goodness.
is the greatest Disney cartoon to ever be cartooned.
I mean, forever, forever and ever, right? I mean, could you imagine when I was a kid? I was like, people drew this? People draw this. And so I started, you know, just like anything else in my life, even today, I dive hard. So I started copying and I started drawing every day. Like, so I went from painting little happy trees from watching Bob Ross to sitting and copying tons of cartoons. And then I started because my parents, you know, were immigrants. So my family and I were from China, from Guangdong, China. I came here when I was 8 months old. So we didn't have a lot of money. I would go to the library and just grab all the art books. And I would sit and I would copy drawings from Picasso I would draw. I would sit in Barnes and Noble, and because I couldn't afford books, I would sit and copy Leonardo da Vinci drawings into my sketchbook. I was obsessed. I wanted to be really
Yeah.
good. I figured if I'm gonna learn anything, even when I was a little kid, I'm gonna learn from people who are really good, right? So representational art, I copied it, and it was magic. I mean, art
Yeah.
for me, it was very magical and really beautiful. And I
What?
chose animation because I thought stable job, right?
Right.
Maybe I
Right.
would do that, and then I thought maybe I'll be happy, and maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. And I started working. I started school at School of Visual Arts, and but I was always painting on my own. And then by some stroke of luck, my first year teacher, drawing teacher at School of Visual Arts, she left, and she was replaced by another woman, this artist, Kathleen Gillia, who I met my second semester of freshman year, and she needed an assistant. She saw that my drawings were good even at that age because I was already in art school, and I also drew every day. I drew all the
Yeah.
time since I was a little kid. And she was like, "Oh, you can come to my studio and see what that's like." And her studio opened up my eyes to everything. I never knew that a woman could make a full-time living painting. She had a huge,
Right.
she has a huge studio. She used to restore old masters when she used to live in Italy when she was my age at the time, when she was in her 20s. And she taught me everything. And honestly, I'm still with her. I'm still her assistant. I became her
Oh,
assistant when I was
wow.
19, and now I'm 42. And I
Wow.
was her full-time assistant in the summers between school. I would work for her 3 days a week after school, and I worked for her all the summers. And I also started working with a mural artist briefly when I was in my 20s, and then I worked with another artist after I left college. So I worked with Kathy and this other artist, and I basically painted for like 60 hours a week with these artists. I would do all their
Wow.
underpainting, I would do all their prep work, and I was working with two very strong, very amazing women. I worked for Suen Wong and I worked for Kathleen Gillia, and I was helping Suen do large scale color pencil drawings, and I was helping Kathy do underpainting for these paintings that look like recreations of old masters. So I basically had all of my art training, my fine art training through them. Because I mean, I could paint when I was in school, but I wasn't an amazing painter, right?
Hmm.
I wasn't going to school for painting. So learning from them really taught me a lot. It taught me a lot as a woman at that age, that I could really have a career in the fine art world. And it taught me work ethic, which
Yeah.
is super important, which is why I work so much now. Being a fine artist is really difficult because it's really unpredictable. So
Hmm.
you were talking about the cycle of making and selling. Well, I didn't sell for the first 10 years of my career. You know, I started
Yeah.
I started showing when I was 22, 23, and no, I didn't sell for all of my 20s pretty much, but I was showing all the time. I was showing all the time. I was in a lot of group shows. I had solo shows. My first solo show at 25 did not sell anything, but yet I kept making art because I'm crazy. Because we have to, right? You're not. I mean, because we have to. So it's funny because one of your first questions is like, inspiration. You're working, and the thing is like at this point, it's so much more than inspiration, right? Like the first part of my career was, yeah, I could make anything I wanted. No one cared, but I was showing, and I was doing interviews and getting articles written about me, but I didn't sell anything almost. I mean,
Yeah.
it's insane how I almost didn't sell anything. And I was still working with these artists. I was working with these artists full time until I was 27. So for about 5 years out of college, I was working really full time. Sometimes I would go from one artist to the other and work until 11 o'clock. And then I would go home and work for myself until 2 and then
Oh,
start again.
wow.
Like if we all had shows at the same time and that was what was happening, I would be working constantly. But and a lot of my early work was all based on cartooning and animation. And I made a lot of work with the characters I was developing outside of school. Like I was painting
Yeah.
these large cartoon characters, and I wanted to tell stories for myself. I wanted to tell stories about my life as an artist, but I also wanted to include all of this training as an animator when I was in my 20s. I painted large cartoons, thrown coffee at each other, and people were showing me. I was like, my first group show, my first two major group shows, one of them was at the Queen's Museum, and for me, showing 5 large paintings in a group show in a museum when I was 24, I mean, that was like a miracle, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah, but I
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
wasn't
That
selling a lot.
question. I want to circle back.
Mhm.
Talk to me about being an artist assistant. What does that look like? What do you actually do as an artist assistant?
Well, so contrary to a lot of what people do or do not know is that so major high-end artists, a lot of them actually like hire assistants to do their work. And luckily I haven't actually worked for artists where I did their work. So in terms of Kathy, because she's not like she's like a very prolific artist. We would do let me see, how can I explain it? So old master paintings or very realistic paintings take several
Hmm.
layers to make. So, and if you're making like a ton of them at once, you need help. A lot of people need help, especially for Kathy. She's making these large paintings. I would come in and I would help her do preliminary drawings, and I would do the first couple of layers of her painting. And then she
Got
would
it.
come in and paint it because it takes so many layers. Oil, you have to build it all up. You're painting and you're painting and painting, and you'll probably do like 3, 4, 5 passes, sometimes 6, sometimes 10
So,
until you
so
get to the
sort
end.
of turning it into almost like an assembly line. Like now she's ready to come at it. You can move on to the next one while she's doing what she needs to do here, like in a way to kind of keep the flow moving when you're working
Yeah.
on like
Yeah.
volume.
Yeah. I mean, assembly line is like a very like there's,
It's very. It
yeah.
doesn't sound good, but I just mean the concept of like, okay, I need you to do layer one and layer two. When you're done, I'm gonna come on top of that, and then you can start on the next one, layer one, layer two, and then
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and I also help her build up her portfolio. Like I help her because she's older than me. I come out of college knowing Photoshop, so I help her do digital compositions, and I help her put together her website and any sort of like computer stuff.
so all the
So,
things you didn't want to do as an animator.
well, you know what was
I'm
just
just
great is yes and no, yes and no. But you know what's great is that because I was in my 20s, I didn't know how to do any of these things. I didn't know how to build a portfolio or build a website or do anything. So it was everything that I learned through her, I put into my own practice, right? Because
right.
when I started working for her, I thought I was gonna be an animator. She always thought that once I was done with school, that I was gonna leave her and that I was gonna end up in a job in animation, and it just kind of didn't happen, right? So I I thought about everything, and my parents were really mad actually when I decided to become a painter. Um, but I looked at everything and I thought, this isn't something I can't do. And I'm already employed. I was working for her and I was working with other artists, and I would honestly for the last whatever years I still get hired by other artists to help them with their work. That I thought, well, this is possible, right? This is okay. So being an assistant is so specific. You have to put your all your ego aside. This isn't your work. But what's great is that I got the best training that I got paid to get trained basically for the last 20 some odd years to become a really good painter. And it
Yeah.
taught me how to work for 8 hours straight. You know, it taught me how to paint and pay attention and to care about quality, really care about quality. Because when you're working with someone who's so good at something, you have to be there to back it up. Like I'm like backup, right? I go in and I make sure that everything is set up in a way that she can come in and like work on it for the next few weeks after I'm done with it. And it's
Right.
kind of beautiful. It taught me so much. It taught me about teamwork, and it taught me how to let go of myself. And it also taught me everything that I could have that I know now about how to handle myself in situations like that. how to work with other people, how to mix colors, how to do technical stuff, and how to have a lot of patience, tons of patience. Because work, when you first started painting, it looks really bad. It looks really terrible. It looks really bad. And then you have to be like, and to know that even, and when I'm at my job, I learned, okay, like eventually it's going to look really good. So I learned, okay, well, this is all about patience. Otherwise, I mean, there's a lot of artists that can do everything all at once. And if we're not those kind of artists. So all of the work I do now is all based on the idea that like it's all about hope. It's all about knowing and having belief in yourself that the work will be good. So that's what I've learned from being an assistant. But also I've taken that as a philosophy for pretty much anything. Like you're not going to be great at something even when you're really good at it at first,
Yeah.
like ever. I mean, you're a musician, like like you learn, you pick up anything new, you write something new, you're trying to play a new song, like it's gonna suck.
Yeah, and sometimes it just like, I mean, does this happen to you with paintings where sometimes it just, even once it's done, it just sucks. Like you have this idea, you think you have all of the right ingredients,
Yep.
and it just doesn't, I mean, maybe it doesn't suck, but it's like, oh, this just can't come together the way that I thought could. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you might have all the, there's musically, you might have the right team of musicians, you might have the right songwriter, you might have the right everything, and it's just like it just doesn't work. Got to move on to
Yeah.
the next thing.
Or maybe you set it aside and go like, well, maybe I want to go back to that later. Or maybe it's just no longer what you want to do anymore. I mean, we have a lot
Totally.
of ideas. The beauty of like being an artist, any kind of creative person, is that like that you could do better.
Mm-hmm.
You know that you can, and nothing is forever. Like a song, you write a song and it can keep changing. You
Totally.
change the production, you add different musicians, like art's the same, and
Yeah.
because it's my work, if I still possess it, I can still fix it. And if I don't, it's okay. I I have definitely painted over work before. I've definitely like materials are expensive. I'm working on these wood panels and they're expensive. So sometimes I go like, it's okay. Take out the sander and I take it away and I start
Right.
over, and then something more beautiful can happen, and it's also okay. And if I ever want to go back to that other idea, you can go back to it. It's fine. Or maybe that's just not who you are anymore. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's very observant. I like that. Maybe it's just not who you are anymore. I like that
Yeah.
because it's all about evolution, right?
Yeah. It's not about mistakes. It's not about mistakes. It's just like you kind of just go like, well, it's just art. Something I've taught a few classes before, and I've taught like a sketchbook class, and I just say like, so this sucks, turn the page. It's okay. It's not a big deal. It's just paper. It's just material. We already have the material. You can keep making stuff, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, my philosophy.
Yeah. So where was that turning point? Because you said how like in your 20s you were showing a lot, but you really weren't selling. What was the kind of the turning point in terms of you starting to sell your work?
Wow. Growing up, I guess. So, talking about like painting over stuff, I spent my whole part of my career, my first 10 years, like painting these very large cartoony paintings where I designed a lot of characters. And maybe I was also trying to make up for the fact that I wasn't a great character designer when I was in college. So I designed all these characters and I created all these like very wild vignettes. I've painted these very large cartoony paintings. And then I went through a period in my early 30s where I went through a very hard depression. And personal issues. My mother had passed away when I was 27. I was no longer working full time. And I would wake up in the morning and I would go, Jesus, like, why am I even waking up? Like, what am I doing? What am I doing getting up to this morning? I would look up at the ceiling and I'm like, I'm not working. And a friend of mine just offered me his studio so I can paint in it for free. But I would wake up and go like, well, what do I do? Do I get up? Do I wake up today? Do I get up and like go? And I just go like, well, what else am I doing? Right. So I get up. So I was having a hard transition because I was in my 30s. I wasn't selling. I was still showing all the time. Like it was crazy. but I wasn't selling. And I had to tell myself that it didn't matter, that that's not why I make work, right? So it's not why we make things to begin with if we're kind of looking for this outside validation. So I started telling myself, well, if you're not going to paint, maybe you should draw. Just draw. I took out a sketchbook and I started drawing a lot all the time. I drew every day, and I told myself I wasn't allowed to make any more paintings until I filled up the sketchbook. And at the time, I also started seeing a therapist. um, and now I've been with the same therapist for 10 years. I just saw her today. And I would go to therapy and I would go like, I don't want to paint anymore. Painting is stupid. And and it was so weird. It was this weird place where this is maybe what happens when you get older. You kind of look at your life and go like, where am I? And going into your 30s, you've discovered a lot about yourself, but you also haven't discovered anything
Mhm.
at all. Like there's this weird, it's like this weird
You're
liminal
not as
place.
together as you anticipated. Like when you're in your early 20s, when you're teens, you think, oh, people in their 30s, they're together, they got their careers together, they got their relationships together, they're together. And then you like get to your 30s, you're like, oh.
Yeah, exactly. And like we all
There's
had
still
this
more
like
work to do.
yeah, but we all have this idea, and maybe from our generation, Jordan, like where we thought we are gonna get married, have the kids, and everything was gonna be great. And I was like, oh no, like I was like single at that time, still am. And I live for working. I love working. I was still picking up gigs, but I didn't know what I was doing. So I told myself, let's just draw. Let's just draw. Let's just sit and draw and just ask myself, what is it that I really want to do? What do I want to draw now? Now that I've been painting these cartoons forever. But I was also not sure what else I wanted to paint, what else I wanted to do, because I've been making those paintings for 10 years. And granted, nobody wanted them, but I was showing all the time and I was getting all these write-ups and stuff. So I thought, okay, well, what do I really care about? What do I really want to do? And I remembered this bird called the bowerbird that spends his life, the male bowerbird spends his life collecting all these objects and all these sticks and creating these structures. And that this bower that he creates is like a stage for mating. And the female bird comes down and she checks out his handiwork. And if she likes it, they mate. And I thought, well, what a really great story. I love this story because it's kind of like us, right? We make things. You are a musician. You show people your music. You play. You perform. We decorate our homes. And I thought, well, that's a great little story for all of us. We have, as an artist, I make all of this stuff to be told that what I make is beautiful and that I want it. And so I thought about him, and I've kind of gone through a couple of years where I was like, wow, really hard on myself. I didn't want to show anymore. I didn't want to paint anymore. And I remembered this bird. So I was like, I started collecting objects. I
Okay.
started building these things in my apartment. I started collecting objects, shiny objects, and I started building and picking up sticks and building bowers in my apartment. And I started photographing them. And I started making paintings of them. And I was completely changing the way I was making my work. I went from painting these wild oil paintings to deciding I'm going to pick up a different, I decided to pick up acrylic painting, which I had never done before. And I thought to myself, okay, so if we're going to change what we do, we're going to learn something new. Let's just learn something new. And for those of you who don't paint, oil painting is actually remarkably different from acrylic painting. So I had to completely teach myself this new medium. And I started building these things in my apartment. It was really weird. There were sticks everywhere. It was really gross. But I was also like taking photos, and I started painting them, and I started doing drawings of them every day, every single day. And then people started buying the drawings. And I was like, people are buying these drawings. So weird, so strange, you know? And I was working with a gallery at the time who said, well, why don't you start painting again? And I was like, I don't want to paint anymore. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. But, I had a lot of encouragement from the people that was around me, the artists that are around me. And they're like, well, if you're going to change, you should just do whatever you want. The beauty of not being famous.
Right? You're not pigeonholed into
Yeah.
anything. It's like,
The
okay, I'm gonna
beauty.
try this week. I'm gonna wake up and try this
Mhm.
today.
Yeah. The beauty of not being famous is that nobody cares what you do. You
Right.
know, you actually have a lot of freedom. You have a lot of freedom. You could do anything you want. You can experiment and you can play. And so I started picking up acrylic painting, and I sanded over a whole bunch of canvases that I had started that I didn't like anymore. And I started making these large scale paintings of these birds with these nests, with these bowers. And my very first show with them, I had a friend offer me a beautiful space in Brooklyn to have a show with them. And I was like, I don't know what they're going to be. She's like, well, you have 6 months. Figure it out in 6 months. You'll have a show, and you're going to have a show in 6 months. And so I created an entire body of work where I probably had like 20 drawings at that time. I had probably like 10 paintings, and it was only for one night. And it was perfect because I didn't have to worry about anything but myself. I only had to worry about showing them to people. I didn't have to worry about selling. I didn't have to worry about a gallery taking a percentage. I didn't have to worry about anything. And I was like, this was perfect. It was like my debuting of like the new type of work I was making. And this work, in a lot of ways, this work is really beautiful. I mean, you'll see it on my website. I mean, this work was really beautiful compared to the work I was making. I was like aesthetically beautiful. And I would say because I was making aesthetically beautiful things and also telling this story that was about the story about trying to get acceptance from the
Mm-hmm.
general public, and just in general, this bird trying to get acceptance and trying to get love through the things he was making. I started telling the story. I started showing this work, and the work started to sell. And for me, that was like mind completely blown, right? And you can't. I was once told by a gallery that you cannot ever tell. You don't know why you don't sell, and you also don't know why you are selling when you are selling. And I kind of looked at it and I go like, yeah, well, the work is now mature, right? The work is like
Mm-hmm.
really mature now. Like the work is more mature. The work is better. The work is technically better. And also, if you look at what I was doing in my 20s compared to what I was doing in my 30s, it's day and night. I've had people say, well, it's like you're a completely different artist. And you know, I was. I've gone through a major
Well,
depression. I've gone through the death of a parent, and I was telling a really personal story about love and acceptance.
yeah. But also, when you were first starting off, you literally were. I mean, yes, you graduated from school, but you were still in school for all intents and purposes, exploring, just trying to, like, you finding your voice,
Yeah.
right? I would imagine, like, your early work, your very earliest work, it was things that you liked, right? And things that you thought were cool and things that you thought were interesting, but you hadn't necessarily found your voice, and really found out, kind of like what we said about just going into your 30s, like all of a sudden you're more comfortable in your skin, right? At 30, you're much more comfortable in your skin than you are at 20. At 30, you have your boundaries and what you'll allow people, how you'll allow people to interact with you are much clearer at 30 than you are in your 20s. You know, by the time you're 30, you've tried a lot of different things and oh, nope, never doing that again. In your 20s, you don't have that. So I'm sure that is a that's probably what it is. Like, I think
Yeah.
you're in touch with you're more in touch with yourself, and as a result that reflects in your art. And so as a result of that, if I'm a buyer or a collector, it's like it comes through. It's really authentic.
Yeah. And also it's also for me, like we all have limitations. My limitations might be my occasional depression, right? And
Right.
and in order to work through, it's like art helps me work through those things. And at that time I was only seeing my limitations, when I was going through that. And I think we
Yeah.
do that when we're going through depression. We only see our limitations and we forget that there's anything else, right? And having felt that and experienced that in my early 30s, and now when I see that happening, I go like, all right, we're not gonna do that again, like, or we're gonna, try to keep that from happening. And what's great is that now, and it's kind of hard to say, it's like through that acceptance, it's been more encouraging, and with that encouragement, I'm able to make even more work now than I was
Right.
before. And the work is now better. And the more work we make, the better it gets. And I at this point with at that point, like being it was really great to go into the studio and go like, wow, this work is actually really good. And sometimes, as a woman, and we're not always told that it's okay to say, oh, we're really good at something, you know?
Right. You're supposed to be modest. You're supposed to, yeah.
Yeah, and it was really great to come into the studio and be like, I'm good at this. I just taught myself how to use use a medium that I like didn't know how to use before. And I'm now like relearning how to paint, and I'm relearning what it means to express myself in a way that I never thought that I'd ever become like a good. I always felt that I was a good artist, but I never thought that there was going to be a difference between being like a bad painter or a good painter. I knew that I was a good. I knew it was good, but what was great about going into this next phase was being like, oh, let's lean into being really good at this.
Yeah.
Not just being like leaning back on like the cartoony stuff and leaning back on this like aesthetic, but let's like come into it and be like, let's just get really, really good at this and see how far it gets you. And now I've been doing acrylic for almost 10 years now, and still it's still really hard. It's still this like weird thing where I'm still trying to figure out the language of it, but that's kind of the beauty of it. Language changes all the time. All languages change all the time. They're always evolving. And I like that I'm kind of in a place with it where I'm like, oh, well, how much further can I take it? And and now I can kind of lean back and say, what kind of stories do I want to tell? Beyond that story, beyond the story of this bird. And what's great is that the story of that particular bird, the bowerbird, took me to so many places. Like I ended up doing talks about it. I gave a lecture about it, and I was invited to like speak to people about finding the language of love, which is essentially what that bird is doing. He and like a lot of other animals express themselves through like visual things, like collecting things. And there's like the Japanese pufferfish that creates these like beautiful patterns in the sand on the bottom of the ocean. And that's brought me into this whole other world of like of, of of animals and how they express themselves. And so a lot of that has actually bled into the work I'm doing now, which is all about how animals express themselves and how they show themselves, and the way we perceive them, because like animals are magic.
Do you do a lot of observing? Like, do you do a lot of like sitting in the park and watching like the squirrels just interact with each other, or watching like nature shows? Like, how are you building that world, those characters, and um, telling that story of them interacting in the most authentic way?
Well, I'm a couple of years ago I became a birder. It's become a really big part of my life. I got myself a big camera. So in addition to painting, I now go around and I photograph birds. So right now it's spring migration in New York City. Actually, it's spring migration, and I go outside with my camera a lot, and I just watch. And it's brought me a lot of peace. It's helped me a lot with my mood. It's helped me a lot with um, it's gotta just help me a lot with like my general life, because here we are, people, we're doing all this stuff, we're hustling, we're bustling, we're commuting, we're getting on the subway, we're doing all this stuff. And then I go and I see a bird just living its life, you know? And some of these birds are traveling hundreds of miles to get here on their way up north or south, right? So right now they're all flying north. And all these birds are stopping off and just eating and eating and eating, trying to survive, and then like making their way back up north, you know? And that has taught me that what I do, all the things that I worry about, is kind of silly. Even though, yes, I worry all the time. I'm an avid worrier. I have lots of anxiety. But when I go outside and I see these animals, these tiny, tiny little birds that have traveled miles and miles and miles to get here, I'm like, how did you do that? How did you manage to do all of that? Like, you don't have a job. You don't have to show, you don't have to do stuff. Like your job is to exist. And sometimes when I see them, I'm just reminded that the world is really, really beautiful. And the world isn't just like you or me. It's just not my studio, even though I'm here all the time. And so I bring a lot of that love of nature into my work now. Like, so I'm, for this next show, I'm doing, my next show is in Australia at Bain Art Gallery in Melbourne.
Okay.
And I had spent some time in Arizona and I photographed a lot of horses. And I, have bringing these visuals into my work. Like I had never seen a wild horse before. I mean, we don't think about it. There, these large creatures, there are still like large populations of them out in the world, like living their lives. So I've been bringing a lot of the way I feel about nature into my work. So I'm painting more than just birds now. But I'm also bringing a lot of what I see, what I observe. And like, I love that it makes me feel very small, you
Mm-hmm.
know, going out into the world, going out to see these, like all of these wild horses just running along the land. And it just makes me feel like what I do, my life, like all the things I feel are so small.
It goes back to what you were saying earlier about like the positive or the benefit of not being famous.
Yeah.
When you're like if you are the world, then all eyes are on you, and that's when you really get self-conscious and anxious and oh my God, what should I be doing? But if you realize, oh my God, I'm just a small piece of this huge masterpiece, I can just do my thing, and I'm a part of it, and I'm a part of and the choices that I make add color to this, and I don't have
Yeah.
to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. We're not just our Instagram posts, you know, we're not, where our lives are not based on how many people like our Instagram posts. Which is like what you're kind of taught when you're in the art world a lot. Like you're like, so it used to be that when Instagram first came out, a lot of galleries were picking up artists based on how many Instagram followers they had, which is so crazy.
But that's
And
how it works now. I talk to friends of mine who like on Broadway, and like they say like that'll be like the first question they'll ask you when you walk in to an audition, like how many followers do you have?
wow, is that a real thing?
It
People are still
is.
asking that. That's so bonkers. It's so bonkers. Listen, I'm a late adopter. I'm a late adopter for everything. I didn't get a cell phone until I was like, oh my God, I was in my mid 30s when I got a cell phone, like a
Yeah.
smartphone, right? Like boy, has my time changed since I got one of those. But certainly, like, oh my goodness, I cannot. Like, I'm such a late adopter on social media and everything, so I'm behind on that. But I also don't care, because in the end, it's not really about that. And I constantly tell people, don't. You just have to make stuff. It doesn't matter,
Yeah.
like I don't know how much better anybody is doing than I am based on their followers. I mean, maybe they're making a few more sales, but honestly, time is valuable. Like I don't work I mean, I don't
You'd
work
rather
a
be out
regular.
watching beautiful birds and getting inspired
Oh,
by that than sitting in. It's what you said originally, why you decided not to be an animator. You don't want to sit in front of your computer all day.
yeah, I don't want to sit in front and do stuff that like is so inconsequential to my life in so many ways, and it makes us feel bad about ourselves. So I didn't want to keep feeling bad about myself, and I didn't want to make people feel bad about themselves because it looks like I'm showing or doing more than other people. And like there's so much that I don't even want to worry about, you know? But like I want to go outside and like watch things happen. I want to go and travel. Like I'm going to go to Australia for 3 weeks for this show and just watch the birds and hopefully see a kangaroo and like live my life a little bit.
Yeah, those Australian birds. I remember the first time I used to go to Australia twice a year in the early 2000s to perform. And I'll never forget the first time. It was the first time I'd ever been on that side of the world. And I was in Sydney. And I was actually staying with a friend who lived in the suburb north of Sydney. And I'm walking down the street. It's, pretty. All of a sudden, I hear this sound that sounded like it was something out of Jurassic Park. I look, and I look up, and I have no idea, what kind of a bird it was, but it was so beautiful, but it sounded like I thought it was gonna like come down and bite me. And so I'm all saying that to say that I think it'll probably be really cool for you to spend the 3 weeks in Australia and just be surrounded by something completely different than what everything we have in here in New York, in New York City, where different animals, different, just different, and just to kind of take it all in.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And also just to kind of get out of the studio would be really great. I spend a lot of time in my studio. I'm not here every day like I used to be. I actually told myself that we cannot spend our entire lives in here. We can't, because they will just like drive us all crazy. But because so much of my life in the last 6 months have been putting together one show after the other. I just had a 2-person show at Antler Gallery in Portland, and then I was immediately working on this next show for Australia. And after a while, your well just dries up. You know,
Yeah.
like at some point, um, I've been painting and painting and painting for the last few years. And so the thing is when you start, so the thing is like with the trajectory of like fine art careers is that it's sort of like an endless task, right? So if you're not super famous and you're able to hire a bunch of people to make your work, and you're not able to sell your work for a ton of money, to most of us are just kind of working, right? So this is like
Hmm.
a funny thing. Like I think that you were talking about like you don't know so much about the fine art world. The thing is like there's a lot of reportage about like how things get, oh, this thing sold for like $1 million, right? Or like this painting sold for this painting sold for that. That's actually quite unusual, which is why
Hmm.
it's kind of like a shark attack, right? You're like, you hear about the shark attack, but actually it doesn't happen that often. Or like a plane crashing, it actually doesn't happen that often, but we report on it because it happened, right? Because you're like, it doesn't happen very often. Truthfully, for most of the time, as you know, as a musician, as a creative person, is that most of us never make it that far, right? We'd like to hope so. Maybe one day to sell the work for even like 5 figures if we're lucky, you know? But most of the time, I'm just a working artist. I take commissions. I sit in my studio and I make things for shows, but I don't know if I'm going to sell them. So
Right.
there's the things that I love and the things I do for money. So if you think about it, for the first half of my career, I didn't sell anything. So what did I during that time? I took on a lot of mural jobs. I took on commissions doing portraits. I drew a lot of cats. I've drawn a lot of dogs. And I mean, I love cats and dogs. Totally okay. Painted a lot of birds. And I took and sometimes I would like every now and then I would pick up some weird job. Like I sold jewelry for like a season somewhere. Or I picked up a lot of little jobs in my 20s and my 30s. And now because of my career is a little bit more developed, I'm taking on more painting jobs where people are hiring me to do stuff that I do normally. But the thing is, it's like if you kind of, what I kind of told myself years ago, and which I'm going to tell to everybody is like, this is a job, right? This is
Hmm.
not the getting the shows. The show is like the icing on the cake that everybody sees, but everything else is a hot mess. Like everything else is like right. Everything else inside of this cake, there's like all the stuff that went into it, and it may not be great. So
Hmm.
and so it's this like funny thing where when you see photos of artists at their shows, like behind all that was hundreds of hours of us crying and being tired and not sleeping and going broke. Right. So it's like, but we see all these great photos of artists like dressed up. And that's probably the only time we ever get dressed up.
That's the Instagram moment.
That's the Instagram
That's the
moment where
Instagram
everybody is like,
moment.
you look fabulous. I was like, I'm exhausted and I have not slept in a really long time. And so it's this like really funny thing where it's so completely not glamorous. Like half the time I'm like, how am I going to make a paycheck this week? Like what am I
Hmm.
doing? And it's so much better than it used to be, granted, because when I didn't used to sell at all and that wasn't even part of my stream of income, it was really, really scary. And at this point, that now my biggest issue is that I'm now more in demand to show, but galleries take 50% of the sales. And so I'm always just trying to like catch up with the creative process where I have to tell myself, okay, so today we're just gonna make stuff because we like it.
Right.
Because it's this constant sense of like we're going to make and make and make and make and make, and then what? So I have to sometimes I like to go back and think about what did I used to do to make me really happy. So
Yeah.
I picked up the photography, but I also, when I'm lucky, I get a chance to sit and just draw and just be by myself. And I mean, it's like this really funny thing where when no one used to care about the work, it was it was sad and weird, but now people care about the work, but it's still kind of like, oh, like it's kind of still the same in a lot of ways, except that now I have to work more.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, now I still have to work more. It's great.
One of my childhood friends, we always used to say, you get everything you want out of life. It just doesn't end up looking the way you thought it did.
Oh my God, not at all. I'm finally showing at all the galleries I ever wanted to show at, but I'm still like, oh, like things are still really weird. They're just weird in a different way because I'm in my 40s now, right? So they're different in a weird way where I'm like, oh, I can't work here for 24 hours anymore because I don't have the energy and I don't want to, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Are you with galleries? With galleries, this is like I said, it's so fascinating. So can you give the same work to different galleries, or does every gallery have to have their own original pieces that they're representing?
Oh, it really depends. So
Because
depending
I'm
on the
just thinking,
show,
like, God, that do you really have to be prolific?
you have to be prolific. So what I kind of do is when I'm with, it depends on the gallery. Some galleries for this next show that I have in Australia at Bain Art, they said we mostly want new work. So I'm like, that's fine. I gave them 8 paintings and I made 6 new paintings for them. When I'm doing like a show that's just for me, like a solo show or a 2-person show, my impulse is always to make as many as possible.
Mm-hmm.
With other galleries, if I'm doing a group show, if they're unless they're specifically saying I want something new, I give them something that I already have. But I mean, so I am lucky. I have less and less work as I've gone along. You know, like I'll sell if I sell the work, then I don't, then it's sold, so I have to start again. But it really kind of depends on the gallery. So I mean, yeah, I mean, these are all things I guess for those of you who don't know too much about gallery stuff. Like galleries, they work on commission and they put together these group shows and where there's going to be multiple artists in the show. So for me, there's less stakes, but a lot of galleries use that as a litmus test to see whether or not the work will sell, like whether how your work is received at a certain space, especially if it's a new gallery that you've never worked with before. So they kind of test you out. But generally, if we're lucky, the gallery likes you. If they like you, and they ask for a piece. So yeah, I'm lucky right now. I'm working with a lot of different places where I'm not fully represented by any one gallery right now, and so I have a lot of freedom. So if I'm working with different galleries, I can say yes or no. Like people now at this point, I get invited a lot. I no longer like apply for shows. So if I get asked to do a show, I kind of go like, well, this is a new gallery. I've never worked with them and I really like them. So it's more of an impulse to make them something new or give them something really, really good,
Right.
it hasn't sold already. So yeah, it's a process and it's different for everybody. It's really different for
Yeah.
every artist, the way we feel. Like every gallery has a different philosophy, but I also sort of put limitations on that where they're like, if I look at my schedule and I go, I really can't give you something new, but I have this, see how you feel about it. And most of the time they'll say, yeah, I'll take it if I'm lucky, you know?
Yeah. Yay. Well, so with that in mind, you have your show coming up in Australia. Where can because we're actually basically at time, so we have to sign off. And I really could continue talking to you for the rest of the evening because you're really fascinating, and I really like the way you think about things and your philosophy. Where can our listeners, where can we find you online
Well,
to
you can
learn
find
more about
me,
you and keep up with where you'll be showing?
well, at Instagram. So it's gigichen.art. You could also look me up on Facebook and my website, gigichen.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure getting acquainted with you today.
This was so great. Thank you so much, Jordan. Thank you, Jose.
And thank you all out there in Radio Land for joining us. We'll chat with you next week on another episode of Showtime with Jordan Van Hazel and friends, right here on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas.